Hi everyone! This month we'll be exploring another selection of titles inspired by our summer reading theme, Read Beyond the Beaten Path. That's right, this time our focus is summer camp. Content warning. The following films contain graphic, bloody violence, including people being stabbed, impaled, beheaded, killed with one or more arrows, being stung to death by bees, drowning, bodies arranged after death, that's in our novel this month, as well as rape and various acts of violence against women, transphobia, and homophobia. Viewer and reader discretion is advised. Also, this recording contains spoilers for both movies, though I don't reveal the conclusion of this month's novel. And maybe this goes without saying, but in talking about these films, I'm not necessarily recommending them. I'm telling you that they exist, and I'm saying that I've watched them, and you can kind of decide for yourself after hearing these descriptions if you think you'd enjoy them yourself. Maybe enjoy is a strong word, as you'll see. Our first title is Friday the 13th. This 1980 film came to be in part due to the success of John Carpenter's Halloween, which was released in 1978. The movie follows a group of counselors as they work to open Camp Crystal Lake, which had been closed ever since two counselors were murdered there in 1958. Following the drowning of a boy at camp in 1957. Annie, one of the counselors, makes her way toward camp. Her first ride, a man named Enos, warns her about Camp Crystal Lake's grim past, but on the next leg of the journey, Annie is picked up by someone the camera doesn't show, who eventually drives Annie past the camp, then pursues her when she escapes from the vehicle. Annie is killed in the woods by this mysterious driver. At Camp Crystal Lake, the counselors are busy working to repair the cabins and buildings that have been abandoned for the past 2 decades. With the storm approaching, Steve, the owner of the camp, leaves to buy more supplies, but when he returns later that evening, he recognizes the killer. Again, we can't see their face, before being stabbed to death. In Steve's absence, the counselors pursue different activities. Ned disappears after a stranger he saw enter a cabin, and later, Marcy and Jack have sex in the same cabin, not knowing that Ned's body is in the bunk above them. As with Annie, his throat has been cut. From here, deaths become more grisly and frequent. Someone under the bed kills Jack with an arrow to the throat while Marcy is in the bathroom, and then Marcy is killed with an axe. Brenda follows the voice of a young boy to the archery range, and her body is later thrown through a window to menace final girl Alice, who also discovers Bill pinned to the door of the generator room with arrows. Alice doesn't know it at this point, but she's the only person left alive at camp, until the arrival of a woman named Mrs. Voorhees. Mrs. Voorhees claims to know Steve, the owner, but she soon reveals that it was her son, Jason, who died in 1957, and she blames the counselors who were having sex at the time Jason drowned. What follows is a pitched battle between Alice and Mrs. Voorhees, the killer, which ends in the latter's decapitation, after Alice is able to wrestle the machete away from her attacker. Alice then falls asleep in a canoe that floats out into Crystal Lake, where, in one of horror's best jump scares, the waterlogged corpse of Jason Voorhees attacks her. Alice wakes up to find herself surrounded by police and hospital staff. When she asks about Jason, they tell her that there was no sign of anyone else when she was found. The final shot of the film features Crystal Lake, its surface disturbed by ripples as something moves beneath the water. Friday the 13th is the only horror franchise I can think of in which the unkillable masked figure who stalks teens throughout the lengthy series doesn't actually kill anyone in the first film. The killer here is Mrs. Voorhees, and her anger, while justified, turns to murderous rage 2 decades after her son's death, though certainly it's implied that she committed the murders in 1958 as well. This is a movie that revels in the excesses of the genre. Some kills strain credulity, sure, but Jason, like Michael Myers, is basically a deathless demon, so let's not quibble. Suspend your disbelief and enjoy a few entries in this lengthy series. Yes, Friday the 13th Part 2 is arguably stronger than the original. Yes, the one where Jason goes to New York is ridiculous. And yes, he does go to space in Jason X. I give this movie 3 out of 4 bloody machetes. Sleepaway Camp is the story of a girl named Angela Baker, whose aunt has sent her to Camp Arawak. This is 8 years after Angela's brother Peter and her father were killed in a boating accident, and Angela, who is shy and traumatized, is bullied at camp. Soon, Camp Arawak is shaken by a series of accidents. A boy named Kenny drowns, and then another boy named Billy is stung to death by bees after being trapped in a bathroom. This seems suspicious, certainly, but Mel, the camp's owner, is worried about bad publicity, especially with the latter death, and is determined to keep these accidents under wraps, though he himself suspects there may be a killer on the loose. Meanwhile, Angela is starting to find friends at camp. Two boys, Ricky and Paul, fight Kenny, before he drowns, and Mike for bullying Angela, and Paul later walks her back to her cabin. The two eventually run around the lake before stopping to kiss, but Angela flees after she remembers the time she and her deceased sibling saw her father and his business partner, Lenny, in bed together. This is foreshadowing, sort of. A girl named Judy sets her sights on Paul, and Angela catches them kissing. Angela is then thrown into the water by Meg, her counselor, and Judy, but is rescued by Ricky. Some kids throw sand at them, and Ricky swears vengeance against Angela's various tormentors. Later, Paul and Angela make up and plan to meet at the lake later. Judy is raped with a curling iron and smothered to death in her cabin. Meg's body is discovered, and remember those kids who threw the sand at Ricky and Angela? They're killed in the woods with a hatchet. At times, this movie is a series of dizzying juxtapositions between teen camp romance / coming-of-age story and brutal murders. Oh, and because he overheard Ricky's promise to get revenge for Angela, Mel, the owner of the camp, believes Ricky is the killer, and he attacks him, though Ricky survives and Mel sees the real killer before, wait for it, being shot in the throat with an arrow. Apparently this trope is inescapable in a movie with a serial killer at a summer camp. Angela meets up with Paul, and they plan to go skinny dipping that night. When the couple is discovered later, Paul's head is resting in Angela's lap, and she hums while stroking his hair. A flashback now reveals that it was Peter, not Angela, who survived the boating accident years ago. Aunt Martha wanted a girl, though, not a boy, and so Peter was raised as Angela. When the flashback ends, Angela stands up, nude, revealing male genitalia, and Paul's severed head falls to the ground. The movie ends fixed on Angela's face, twisted in a rictus of homicidal mania. Is sleepaway camp problematic? Yes, definitely. The idea that Angela Baker's trauma would cause her to become a murderer doesn't really work. Many young people are bullied and don't become serial killers. Angela transitions after the first film, so some have called Sleepaway Camp a trans narrative, which says more about the lack of LGBTQ voices in horror than it does about the quality of representation in this film. The reveal at the end of the movie is for shock value, period. To put it simply, the movie is transphobic about Angela and homophobic about her closeted late father. So why is this film considered a cult classic? Analysis of the movie by actual trans people includes the following quote from Willow McClay, who criticized the, quote, equation of mental instability with having grown up in a gender role not concurrent with your identity. Nearly every single transgender person grows up being raised in a gender role that does not fit, and that doesn't mean that they are mentally ill or seriously violent. Also, I would simply note that mental illness in horror is often treated badly, in the sense that usually that's the excuse for why the killer is doing what they're doing, when of course in real life, if you are someone with mental illness, you are far more likely to be the victim of violence than to cause violence yourself. In writing about Sleepaway Camp, Alice Collins notes that the film is, quote, steeped in queerness, especially when compared to its contemporaries. In its day, it took a deeper look into the subject matter than that of other films. Angela and Peter's dad is a closeted gay man. There's forced gender bending, which is abuse rather than queer, but people will see it as such. And the majority of the scantily clad people in the film are men, with all those very short shorts that leave little to the imagination, while there is little skin shown of the feminine variety. She also writes how Angela really does seem to be trans. Quote, so despite Aunt Martha being insane, she just happened to stumble upon a person who was already a girl, and it was an accident that her brainwashing worked. Overall, this is a deeply flawed but utterly unique film. I give it 2 arrows in the neck. Our novel this month is The Box in the Woods by Maureen Johnson. In 1978, 4 counselors, Eric, Diane, Todd, and Sabrina, went out one night to a campsite where they smoked weed and listened to music. In case you were wondering, Rumors by Fleetwood Mac was what they had in the cassette player. The next morning, the peace of Camp Wonder Falls, where all 4 counselors worked, was shattered by the discovery of Eric's body. Todd, Diane, and Sabrina were also found to be missing, and when the police went searching for them, they discovered their bodies arranged in a gruesome display in an abandoned hunting blind out near their campsite. All 4 counselors had been murdered, and what came to be known as the Box in the Woods murders went unsolved for decades. In the present day, the camp has been purchased by an entrepreneur looking to do a podcast on the case and finally solve it. But to do that, he'll need help. After solving a decades-old cold case at her high school, Stevie Bell became a minor internet celebrity. But fame is fickle, and after a few months of excitement, she's very bored and working at her local grocery store over summer break. So when she's offered a job at Camp Sunny Pines, formerly Camp Wonder Falls, where she can actually work to solve the Box in the Woods murders, Stevie jumps at the chance and recruits her best friends Janelle and Nate to come along. Even her boyfriend David plans to visit. The pain of those touched by the case is still raw. Many friends and family members of the murder victims live in the nearby town of Barlow Corners. Stevie's sincere efforts to help gain her the trust of several survivors, who tell her their stories. But one morning, Sabrina's younger sister falls to her death while out for her morning run. Was it really an accident? Or has a killer returned? This, the 4th book in the Truly Devious series, is a standalone novel, and thriller fans of all ages will enjoy this fast-paced, true crime-inspired tale. Quick sidebar. In a recent live show with Mystery Science Theater alums Trace Beaulieu and Frank Conniff, Jonah Ray noted that when horror succeeds, as with the films of Jordan Peele, it's often rebranded with the term thriller, which seems to be more palatable to audiences and critics alike. Whether you think of this novel as horror or thriller, the descriptions of the murders aren't needlessly graphic, but they definitely capture the horror of the killings, which left a community wondering for decades, who could have done such a thing? If you want to know what Stevie discovers, you'll have to check out the book. Summer camp is, for many kids, the first place where they find themselves away from home and family for an extended period of time. As such, it can be a difficult rite of passage. Some kids revel in their newfound relative freedom, while others struggle just to get through the experience. And the fact that the counselors often aren't much older than the kids adds to the drama. It is, as was said in a recent episode of Mabim Bam, like having a 14-year-old babysit 13-year-olds. Parents worry about their kids being hurt, and they also worry about their relationship with sexual content. Our cultural fascination with the risks inherent in isolating a bunch of hormonal people in the woods make the summer camp slasher story a perennial favorite. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another terrifying trio.